My name is Alina Voss. I'm 37 years old. And the last time my cousin Marcus looked at me with anything resembling respect, we were both 9, and I had just taught him how to catch fireflies in mason jars without killing them. He never learned the trick about being gentle. The fireflies in his jars always died by morning. Tonight, Marcus was holding court at our grandmother's 75th birthday celebration. His phone angled perfectly to catch the chandelier light. His smile, the practiced, slightly asymmetric grin that his 53,000 Instagram followers apparently found irresistible. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my monthly rent, all sharp lines and Italian tailoring, the kind of outfit that announced its price tag before its wearer even spoke. I was wearing a simple black dress from a department store clearance rack, the kind of outfit that whispered invisibility. The party was being held at Luminosa, one of those aggressively trendy restaurants where the plates are the size of saucers, and each microscopic portion comes with a story about heritage seeds and the farmer's spiritual journey. My grandmother, Cecilia Voss, had wanted something elegant but not ostentatious, which in our family's language meant expensive but defensively tasteful. The private dining room was all exposed brick and Edison bulbs, the kind of studied casualness that requires a fortune to achieve. I was seated near the kitchen doors, a position I had come to recognize as my family's designated zone for acceptable disappointments. Across from me was my great uncle Bernard, who was 90 and deaf. Next to him was my second cousin's new girlfriend, a sweet-faced marketing assistant who kept asking me earnest questions about Lowe's Angels, clearly trying to fill the conversational void with kindness. I appreciated her effort. At the head of the table, surrounded by my mother, my aunts, and a constellation of admirers, was Marcus. Marcus Chenvas had become what our family called a success. He was a social media influencer, a title that still sounded vaguely ridiculous when spoken aloud, but translated into a very real income stream from sponsored posts, brand partnerships, and something he called audience monetization. He posted about luxury lifestyle, travel, and what he termed mindset optimization. His content was a carefully curated gallery of rooftop brunches, business-class flights, and motivational captions about grinding and manifesting. He had turned self-promotion into an art form and then into a career. I was the counterpoint to his shine, the cautionary tale. While Marcus had built his empire of attention, I had chosen what the family considered a baffling and vaguely embarrassing path. I worked in music. Not as a performer, they would hasten to clarify when introducing me to their friends, not as anyone famous. I was a composer and producer, the kind of person who worked in studios that didn't have windows, who collaborated with artists whose names they wouldn't recognize, who poured years into projects that might never see commercial success. My mother, Victoria, had a particular way of explaining my career at dinner parties, her voice a masterclass in loving condescension. Alina is very creative, she would say, the words wrapped in the tissue paper of maternal pride but weighted with something else, something that felt like apology. She works in music production. It's quite technical, very behind the scenes. She lives in a little studio apartment in Silver Lake. You know how artists are. They struggle, but they're happy, I suppose. The struggling artist narrative was convenient. It allowed them to file me away in a category they understood, tragic, but contained. What they didn't know, what I had never corrected, was that my little studio apartment had a second bedroom that I had converted into a professional-grade recording space. That my struggles were less about money and more about the brutal perfectionism required to create something that just might matter. That I had spent the last 3 years working on a project that consumed me utterly. Marcus's voice cut through the ambient restaurant noise, loud and performative. He was showing my grandmother something on his phone, and the table around him leaned in like planets drawn to a sun. I watched as he swiped through images, his commentary a practiced rhythm of humble bragging. This was in Dubai. This campaign paid for the down payment on my condo. This partnership with the watch company. See the engagement rate on this post. My grandmother nodded politely, understanding perhaps 1 word in 5. She was from a generation that viewed cameras with suspicion and considered self-promotion a character flaw. But she smiled at Marcus with something like pride, or perhaps just relief that at least one grandchild had managed to translate the modern world into something that looked like success. Then Marcus's eyes found me across the table. There was a glint in them, that particular shine that preceded a performance. He raised his phone like a trophy. "Alina," he called out, his voice cutting through 3 separate conversations. "Cuz, are you on Instagram? I never see you post anything." The table's attention swiveled toward me, a dozen pairs of eyes executing a synchronized pivot. I felt the familiar weight of their gaze, the mixture of curiosity and pity that accompanied any discussion of my digital absence. "I'm on it," I said evenly. "I just don't post much." He laughed, not unkindly, but with the confidence of someone who had never questioned his own relevance. "How many followers do you have?" I knew where this was going. I could feel the shape of the trap, the way he had engineered this moment for maximum contrast. He was not malicious, not exactly. Marcus simply existed in a universe where metrics were meaning, where visibility was virtue, where numbers on a screen translated directly into worth. "Around 300, I said. The pause that followed was exquisite. It hung in the air like a soap bubble, fragile and iridescent with second-hand embarrassment. 300. In a world where Marcus's 50,000 was still considered modest by influencer standards, 300 was essentially invisible. It was a number so small it barely registered, a rounding error, a whisper in a stadium. Marcus's face cycled through surprise, pity, and something that might have been genuine concern. He turned his phone around, showing the table his profile, his grid of perfectly filtered images, his follower count displayed like a credential. "Guys, look, this is what I mean about the importance of building your personal brand. 300 followers, that's like, you're basically not even trying to exist online." My mother made a small sound, something between a sigh and a laugh, a noise that communicated her resigned acceptance of my technological inadequacy. My Aunt Clara leaned over to whisper something to my uncle, and I caught the words typical Alina and always been different. Marcus wasn't finished. His voice had taken on the tone of a TED Talk, earnest and instructional. "Alina, seriously, I could help you. I do consulting now. We could work on your content strategy, get you visible. You can't just hide behind the scenes forever. In this economy, in this world, if you're not online, you don't exist. If you're not online, you don't exist." The words settled over the table like ash. And in that moment, looking at their faces, the mixture of agreement and sympathy, I understood something fundamental. They believed him. They believed that his carefully constructed gallery of borrowed luxury and aspirational captions represented something more real than the 3 years I had spent bent over a mixing board, chasing a sound that lived just beyond my reach. I opened my mouth to respond, to offer some deflection or self-deprecating joke that would release the tension and let the conversation move on to safer ground. But my grandmother's voice cut through first. "Enough," Cecilia said quietly, but with the particular authority that only a 75-year-old matriarch can command. "Marcus, show me the pictures from your trip to Portugal. I want to see the tiles you mentioned." The moment passed. The attention shifted. I became invisible again, which was exactly where I preferred to be. Marcus launched into a detailed description of architectural photography and optimal posting times, and I retreated into the background noise, into the space where I had learned to exist, observing without being observed. But something had shifted. There was a restlessness in my chest, a kind of low-frequency hum that I recognized from late nights in the studio, when a mix was almost right, but not quite, when something needed to resolve but hadn't yet. I excused myself from the table, mumbling something about the restroom, and made my way through the restaurant toward the small outdoor patio area where smokers and people escaping awkward family dynamics congregated. The Lowe's Angels night air was warm and slightly chemical, that particular urban combination of jasmine and exhaust. I leaned against the brick wall and pulled out my own phone, not to scroll, but to check something I had been checking compulsively for the past 72 hours. My email, my messages, waiting for confirmation of something that might not come, that probably wouldn't come, that statistically speaking almost never came. The Recording Academy had announced the nominations for the 67th Annual Grammy Awards exactly 1 week ago. I had watched the live stream alone in my apartment, my coffee going cold in my hands as they moved through the categories. Album of the Year, Record of the Year, the major awards that everyone recognized. And then, deeper into the list, into the categories that the general public didn't watch, the technical categories, the ones that celebrated the people behind the curtain, they had announced the nominees for Best Engineered Album, Non-Classical. My name had been on that list. Elena Voss, for her work on Midnight Mathematics by Sienna Cross. The words had appeared on the screen for exactly 4 seconds before the presentation moved on. 4 seconds. And in those 4 seconds, everything I had worked for, everything I had sacrificed, every night I had chosen the studio over sleep, over relationships, over the normal markers of a life well lived, had suddenly coalesced into a single, validating moment of recognition. But I hadn't told anyone. Not my family, not my friends, not even my grandmother, who I knew would have been proud in her quiet, old-world way. I hadn't told them because I had learned long ago that in my family, accomplishments that couldn't be easily explained or immediately understood were often dismissed as eccentricities. And because some small, protective part of me wanted to keep this moment private, unsullied by their well-meaning confusion or their need to translate my success into terms they could relate to Marcus's Instagram followers. The actual ceremony was still 3 months away. The nomination itself was the victory. Most people didn't win. Most people were simply grateful to be recognized by their peers, to have their work acknowledged by the community that understood what it took to create it. But still, I waited. I checked my email obsessively because the Recording Academy sent official nomination certificates, physical artifacts of the accomplishment, and I wanted to hold it in my hands to make it real. My phone buzzed. Not an email. A text from Jordan Reeves, my friend and collaborator, the mixing engineer who had worked alongside me on the Sienna Cross album. The message was simple, just 3 words and a screenshot. Turn around, now. I looked at the screenshot. It was from a celebrity news site, one of those breathless gossip aggregators that tracked famous people's movements with the dedication of Cold War intelligence agencies. The headline read, Sienna Cross arrives at Luminosa for private dinner. Rising star spotted in Los Feliz hotspot. My stomach dropped. Luminosa, this restaurant, Sienna Cross was here. I turned around slowly, scanning the restaurant's interior through the glass doors. And there, being escorted through the main dining room by a hovering manager and a small constellation of assistants, was Sienna Cross. She was smaller in person than she appeared on stage, more delicate, but with that particular intensity that marked people who lived their lives in the spotlight. Her hair was pulled back severely, and she was wearing what looked like an avant-garde interpretation of a suit, all sharp angles and deconstructed tailoring. She was also looking directly at me. Our eyes met through the glass, and something passed between us, a moment of recognition. She said something to the manager, gestured in my direction, and began walking toward the patio doors. My brain stuttered. This wasn't possible. Sienna Cross and I had worked together in the studio for 8 months, but our relationship had been almost entirely professional, filtered through headphones and mixing boards and the shared language of sound. She was the artist, the public face. I was the architect behind the scenes, the person who took her raw vocal tracks and sculpted them into something that could make people cry. The door opened. Sienna stepped onto the patio, and suddenly there were other people with her, people I hadn't noticed. A photographer, his camera already raised. Another person with a video camera. And behind them, filtering out from the restaurant's interior, curious diners with their phones out. Elena, Sienna said, and her voice was warm, genuine, nothing like the distant professionalism of our studio interactions. I've been trying to reach you. Why don't you answer your phone? I stared at her. I don't understand. She laughed, a sound like crystal breaking. The nomination, Elena, our nomination. I've been calling you for 3 days. We're supposed to do press together. The label has been losing their minds trying to find you. Did you seriously not see any of my messages? I had seen her messages, dozens of them. I had assumed they were about future projects, about courtesy thank yous, about the normal business of maintaining professional relationships. I had planned to respond when I had time, when I wasn't drowning in the emotional quicksand of my family's perception of my failure. The photographer's camera flashed. Once, twice, a third time. Through the glass doors, I could see movement in the private dining room. My family, drawn by the commotion, pressing against the glass to see what was happening. I saw Marcus's face, confusion blooming into realization. My mother's hand rising to her mouth. My grandmother standing, her chair scraping back. Sienna followed my gaze. "Is that your family?" she asked. "Oh God, am I interrupting something? I'm so sorry, when I heard you were here, I had to come. We need to talk about the Rolling Stone interview. They want to feature us, the whole creative process behind the album. And Billboard is doing a Grammy predictions piece. Elena, do you understand what this means?" The photographer was still shooting. The video camera was rolling. And through the doors, I watched as my family began to filter out onto the patio, drawn by curiosity and the magnetic pull of visible celebrity. Marcus was in front, his phone already out, already recording, his influencer instincts overriding his confusion. Sienna turned to face the emerging crowd, and her publicist, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who had materialized from somewhere, stepped forward with the practiced efficiency of someone who managed chaos for a living. She raised one hand, her voice polite but firm. "Please, we need to keep this area clear. Ms. Cross is here for a private conversation." But private was already impossible. The patio had transformed into something else entirely, a stage with unwilling actors and an audience that was growing by the second. Other restaurant patrons had noticed the commotion, and phones were emerging from pockets and purses like bioluminescent creatures surfacing in deep water. I could see the characteristic glow of screens recording, the slight angle of arms raised to capture video, the hungry curiosity of people who sensed they were witnessing something that might become a story they could tell. My mother reached me first. She touched my arm with tentative fingers, her face a composition of confusion and concern. "Elena, what's happening? Who is this?" Her eyes darted to Sienna, trying to place her, to categorize her, to understand why this small, fierce woman in deconstructed tailoring was looking at her daughter as if I were someone important. Sienna extended her hand with the natural grace of someone who had spent years navigating public interactions. "I'm Sienna Cross. Elena and I worked together on my album. She's the reason it sounds the way it does. The reason it exists at all, really." My mother shook her hand automatically, still processing. "You're a singer." Sienna's smile was patient, the smile of someone who was used to being not quite famous enough for universal recognition. "I am, and Elena is a genius. You know that, right? Your daughter is absolutely brilliant." The word hung in the air between us, strange and foreign in my mother's lexicon when applied to me. Brilliant was not a word my family used about my work. Creative, yes. Passionate, sometimes. Impractical, often. But brilliant implied a level of achievement that they had never quite attributed to my behind-the-scenes existence. Marcus had positioned himself at the edge of the group, his phone still recording, his free hand already typing something, probably a caption, probably already crafting the narrative he would feed to his 50,000 followers. His face had taken on an expression I recognized from childhood, the look he got when he realized the game had changed and he needed to recalculate his position. Sienna's publicist leaned in close to her, whispering something urgent, and Sienna nodded. She turned back to me, her expression shifting to something more serious. "Elena, I know this is terrible timing, but we need to talk logistics. The label wants us in New York next week for the press junket. They're putting together a whole campaign around the nomination. They want behind-the-scenes studio footage, interviews, the whole narrative arc." She paused, searching my face. "You did read the email from the label, right? The one about the publicity strategy." I had not read the email from the label. I had approximately 473 unread emails in my inbox, a digital avalanche of information that I had been avoiding with the dedication of someone who understood that looking at problems did not make them easier to solve. "I'll read it tonight," I managed. Sienna laughed, but there was something gentle in it. "You're killing me, Voss. You create this incredible, intricate, emotionally devastating album, and then you just disappear into your cave. Do you know how many producers would kill for this kind of recognition? For a Grammy nomination? And you're just, what, hanging out at family dinner like it's no big deal. It is a big deal, I said quietly. I didn't know how to talk about it. My grandmother had reached us now, moving slowly but with purpose, her cane clicking against the patio stones. She stopped in front of Sienna and regarded her with the frank, assessing gaze of someone who had lived long enough to be unimpressed by most things. "You're the singer," she said. It was not a question. "Yes, ma'am," Sienna replied. "And my granddaughter worked on your music." "She did more than work on it," Sienna said. There was something fierce in her voice now, protective. "Alina took my vocals, my ideas, my half-formed musical instincts, and she turned them into architecture. Every sound you hear on that album, every layer, every emotional beat, that's her. I'm the voice, but she's the vision. We were nominated for a Grammy last week, for her engineering work." The silence that followed was total. It was the silence of a family collectively recalibrating their understanding of reality, of narratives being rewritten in real time, of assumptions crumbling like sandcastles at high tide. "A Grammy," my mother repeated, her voice very small. The photographer's camera flashed again, capturing the moment. I would see the photo later, circulated on social media, picked up by entertainment sites. It showed Sienna and me standing together, my family clustered around us, their faces a study in shock. The caption would read something like, "Sienna Cross surprises Grammy-nominated engineer Alina Voss at family celebration." The story would focus on Sienna's spontaneous gesture, on the heartwarming nature of the surprise, on the friendship between artist and producer. What the photo wouldn't show was Marcus, standing just outside the frame, his phone lowered, his expression carefully neutral. What it wouldn't capture was my mother's hand, still resting on my arm, her fingers trembling slightly. What it wouldn't convey was the weight of years of well-meaning dismissal, of being the eccentric one, the struggling artist, the daughter who had chosen the wrong kind of success. Marcus stepped forward then, and I watched him make the calculation in real time, watched him shift from recording to participating, from observer to player. He extended his hand to Sienna with the confidence of someone who had never met a social situation he couldn't navigate. "Marcus Chenvos," he said. "I'm Alina's cousin. I work in digital media and content strategy. Your social media presence is incredible. That campaign you did with Vogue last month, the engagement metrics were outstanding." Sienna shook his hand politely, but her attention was already elsewhere. Her publicist was checking her watch, making subtle hurry-up gestures, and I could see other people approaching, drawn by the crowd, by the cameras, by the scent of something happening. "I need to go," Sienna said, turning back to me. "But seriously, Alina, check your email. Read the brief from the label. We have interviews scheduled, photo shoots, the whole thing. This is your moment, too. You can't hide from it." She paused, her expression softening. "You deserve this. You deserve to be recognized. Don't let anyone, including yourself, convince you otherwise." She hugged me then, quickly and fiercely, and then she was moving away, her publicist shepherding her back toward the restaurant's interior, the photographer and videographer following, the small crowd parting to let them through. The entire encounter had lasted perhaps 10 minutes, but it had altered the molecular structure of the evening, had transformed everything that came before it into prologue. My family stood around me in various states of incomprehension. My mother still had her hand on my arm, as if afraid I might dissolve if she let go. My grandmother was watching me with new eyes, recalculating. My uncle was already on his phone, probably Googling Grammy nominations, trying to verify this sudden revelation. And Marcus was looking at me with an expression I had never seen before, something that might have been respect, or might have been the dawning realization that his metrics, his carefully curated digital presence, his 50,000 followers, were suddenly, devastatingly irrelevant. "A Grammy," my mother said again, and this time her voice broke slightly on the word. "Alina, why didn't you tell us? If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been underestimated by the people who should have believed in you most, drop a comment below. Tell me about your moment, the time when your quiet work spoke louder than anyone's expectations. And if you're still waiting for that moment, still building in the shadows while others shine in the spotlight, Know this: real power doesn't need an audience. It just needs to be undeniable. Subscribe to this channel if you believe that dignity doesn't require defense, and that the best revenge is simply becoming everything they said you couldn't be. Hit that notification bell, because we share stories here about hidden strength, quiet victories, and the moment when truth finally speaks for itself. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who's been told they're not enough, that their work doesn't matter, that their 300 followers mean they're invisible. Remind them that while others are performing, some of us are building empires that don't need to be announced. And remember, your worth was never measured by who was watching. It was always measured by what you created when no one was.